Welcome to the World of Books, one of seven worlds in Seven World Productions, a subsidiary of Angelgram Music. My name is Gino, and I am sole owner of Angelgram Music and executive director of Seven World Productions. Continuing our series In Search of Beauty, here is Chapter 18, Sheila. Hope you enjoy. Previously on In Search of Beauty, the TV crew began immediately to tear the stage down and load up the lighting and sound equipment for transportation that night. On the stage where the final two had stood with Bob Barker was a huge star. Standing in the middle of this star was Miss Ohio. She was sobbing uncontrollably and visibly shaken by her defeat. No one came to her in the midst of life going on all around her. It was as if a tunnel of time and space was between us, and the universe was waiting with bated breath for the next moment. I had been in the pit with Tad and the cue card guys at the end of the telecast. They had left, and I was mesmerized by the sight of this lady left on stage. I could not help myself and ran up to her and hugged her close. She clung to me with all her might and kept repeating the words, "Why?" As I held her, trying my best to console, all I could think of to say was what my father had taught me. I told her, "Bigger and better things are in store for you. You'll see. You are standing on a star, and someday you will be one. Maybe even win an Oscar. Please believe that, will you? Promise me?" She looked up at me and nodded with her head, and then cried on my shoulder for a few more moments. Then, as if the universe sighed with relief, we parted. And that was the night I said goodbye to Halle Berry. Chapter 18, Sheila. After saying goodbye to Halle, I returned to Dallas and went back to my duties as music director for John Gary. In December of that same year, John got booked to perform on a 14-day Caribbean cruise on the Norwegian ship the SS Rotterdam. We had only 2 shows to perform, with the rest of the time to ourselves as a vacation. The first night on board, all of us were invited by the captain for 1 free drink at the bar. In those days, I was a heavy smoker and drinker, so I took advantage of the captain's offer and attended with enthusiasm. John had been a heavy smoker in his days while I was at Cedar Point, but he had quit when he married Lee, so he declined to go and was gently trying to convince me to quit also. Nevertheless, I went to get my free drink. The bar was a small, dimly lit, smoke-filled room with small tables, bolted-down chairs, and lounges hugging the frame of the ship's hull. I sat down on a stool at the bar and ordered a screwdriver, my preferred drink. I liked the taste of orange juice with the non-alcoholic taste of vodka. You could never smell liquor on someone's breath if they drank vodka. The place was getting crowded as more people came in. Suddenly, the captain of the ship entered with several other people, including a woman who immediately caught my eye. Her presence and poise seemed overwhelming. In the dark, I could barely make out her face, but our eyes converged and I sensed a connection, a bonding that I could not quite understand, but felt like I would. She was sitting with the captain and another gentleman. I looked away and nursed my drink, wondering if I should make a move towards them and strike up a conversation. I decided against it. After a while I grew tired of the place and decided to check out the casino on a lower level. I liked to play blackjack and wanted to try my luck on a cruise ship. As I got up from the bar, I glanced over to the captain's party and noticed that the woman was staring at me. I felt like she was telling me not to leave. As I walked past them, she got up and came straight up to me and said, "Where are you going?" I told her to the casino to try my luck at cards. She put her hand on my arm, and I noticed she had severe burn marks on her hand. Her other hand was twisted in towards her wrist in a strange, half-paralyzed way. I looked at her face and noticed the scars on her cheeks and forehead from reconstructive surgery. She had dark, long hair with beautiful, deep-root, bare, brown eyes. No makeup. She was wearing what I would consider something a gypsy woman would wear without the kerchief over her head. She told me she would see me later. I nodded and mumbled something incoherent and left the bar. When I got to the casino, I half forgot this strange woman and sat down at the blackjack table. I was alone. I liked playing one-on-one with the dealer because I knew how to count cards without being too noticeable. I started with $50, playing $5 at a time, and gradually doubled my money. After about 30 minutes and concentrating on the cards out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the strange gypsy woman had quietly come into the casino and sat next to me. She had a cigarette and a drink in one hand, and her club hand was clutching her small purse against her thin body. Because of the brighter lighting in the casino, I could see that she was older and frail-looking than I had first thought. Yet there was a vitality in her eyes that was hypnotic and enticing. We introduced ourselves. Her name was Sheila Powelko, and she was traveling with her mother. I told her my name and that I was traveling with the entertainer John Gary, and that we would be performing later in the week at the main showroom. She said John was one of her mother's favorite entertainers, and that they would look forward to seeing us perform. As I was playing the game, she asked me what the rules were, and I proceeded to explain to her the fundamentals of blackjack. After a few hands, she asked me if I could predict which card would come up next. I said, sometimes. She said, what if I could tell you how to predict them all the time? I laughed and said, that was not possible. Luck doesn't play the game that way. She said, what if it was possible? I said, prove it. She said she had some unfinished business with a client, the gentleman who was a friend of the captain. Her gentleman friend was debarking at our first port of call in 2 days. After that, she said we could get together and she would show me how to predict the future with cards. We left the casino together and I walked her back to her cabin. We made note of each other's cabin number and said good night. The next 2 days went by uneventfully, with the exception that on the second evening, a Saturday night, John and I performed our first of 2 shows to a packed room of John's fans who gave us a standing ovation. Our second show was on the following afternoon, a Sunday matinee. Sheila and her mother were in attendance. Once again, we were rewarded with a standing ovation at the conclusion of our show. After the performance, I introduced Sheila and her mother to John and Lee. John autographed CDs they had purchased. In those days, John stipulated in his contract that he could sell his CDs and cassettes at all of his concerts. Some venues would require a percentage of the take, but John liked selling them to make a few extra dollars along the way. He called it his mad money. Usually a table would be set up at the entrance to the venue, where after the performance John would sit and sign autographs, and Lee would help in selling John's many products. John even joked about it at the end of each performance about how Lee had jams and jellies and macrame along with the albums for sale. While John and Lee accommodated their patrons, Sheila and her mother and I went to the buffet for dinner. They told me all about their kosher lives living in Clark, New Jersey, how Sheila's dad, Jack, owned an auto parts store in Passaic, and that this trip was for the girls since Jack and Sheila's mom were divorced. Sheila told me about her young daughter Zoe, who was attending Rutgers, majoring in acting. I told the ladies about my other job as choral director for the Miss USA, Miss Teen USA, and the Miss Universe pageants. They were duly impressed and asked 1,000 questions. After dinner, Sheila's mom went to retire while Sheila and I went up to the deck to talk. Sheila asked, "Are you ready to find out about the future?" I told her I was a bit skeptical, but decided to play along. After all, she was not charging me a fee like most card readers do. We sat down in a private corner at a table. She dug into her purse and pulled out a regular deck of cards. "What? No tarot cards for me?" I cried. She said that ordinary cards would do, but that the only prerequisite was that the deck shall have not been played with at all, sort of a dedicated deck just for delving into the possibilities of the future. She gave me the cards and told me to shuffle them, and while I was shuffling them, to say a short prayer of thanks and request a glimpse into the future. Once again I played along and did as she asked. She then took the cards from me and held them close to her heart and closed her eyes and prayed also. A moment later she opened her eyes and started to lay the cards face up on the table. She had handwritten phrases on all the cards, with simple phrases like male, female, work, time, etc. When she had laid out most of the cards, she looked at them and started to describe the history of my life up to the present. Now, mind you, we had not talked much about my life during dinner, only their lives in New Jersey. She stated that my parents were immigrants and came from an Eastern European country, and that my father was a man of the cloth. She stated that my father had passed away and that I had 2 brothers, and one of them had passed away too. I just sat very still and quiet as she slowly and accurately described my life in such detail that I was convinced of her authenticity as a psychic. When she finished, she looked at me and said that my father had given me something of great value and that I should carry it with me all the time as a powerful talisman. She said that it was a shiny piece of metal, round in shape, that held deep meaning to my father and I, something my father had given me prior to his open-heart surgery. At the time of her reading on the boat, I could not remember what it was that my father had given me, but later I would be startled and amazed upon finding the object back home in my apartment, a 1922 Liberty Series silver dollar. I now carry it with me wherever I go. I was mesmerized, to say the least, by this woman. We talked some more, and I told her that John and I were scheduled to perform in Phoenix, Arizona at the Biltmore Resort in the Frank Lloyd Wright-built Aztec Lounge right after the cruise. We were scheduled there through New Year's Eve, then a 2-month stay in Pasadena at Maldonado's restaurant. I told her that I would have some free time in the spring between the Miss USA and the Miss Universe pageants. Miss USA was to be held in February in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Miss Universe in May in Singapore. I was not able to work the Miss USA pageant that year because of John's booking in Pasadena. David Barella was the choral director for that show. Tad made me promise not to miss any more, and I didn't. I was scheduled for Singapore and the Little Sisters in May. I asked Sheila would it be all right to come and visit her. I told her I was writing some original songs and wanted to visit Pete Stocky at Warner Brother Records in Manhattan. Pete was John's old buddy, and Pete graciously had consented to critiquing my songs. Sheila said that she had dabbled in writing poetry and would I be interested in some of her works. I said sure, why not? So we agreed to stay in touch and planned for me to come and stay at their home in Clark, New Jersey in March of 1987. The remainder of the cruise was spent in vacationing style. We took an excursion tour at the port of call in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. Sheila and I went with her mother to the island to look for some jewelry. Sheila told me that when you hold a piece of stone or crystal in your palm and it feels cool to the touch, that then you know the stone or gem is authentic and not paste. When not strolling through all the touristy places, I stayed on ship and played bridge with fellow passengers. All in all, it was a very interesting time. My first cruise. When we got to Phoenix, John and I would play golf during the day at the Biltmore and perform at the Aztec at night. I called Sheila every night after 2 a.m. and we talked about the songs we were going to write. She gave me lyrics over the phone and I would try to write some melodies to them. Our closing night in Phoenix was New Year's Eve. The night before, I unfortunately drank too much and had a cramp in my stomach that would not go away. John and I had finished for the evening and I had stayed at the bar with some ladies. I went to the little boy's room and couldn't urinate. I came out doubled over with a pain in my back that was unrelenting. I was sobering up fast but could barely walk. One of the ladies at the bar, who I had been talking to, told me that I looked as white as a sheet. She helped me out to her car and she drove me to the emergency ward at Phoenix Hospital. They diagnosed me with kidney stones. I was in such pain that every 2 hours they would pump me full of morphine and keep me quiet and then take me up to X-ray. They kept showing me how the stone was trying to go through this thin, vein-like tube, and that was causing all the pain. Every 2 hours, the routine got repeated until about 20 hours later, I finally passed the stone. Talk about labor. I spent that entire time in emergency. The urologist said that I needed to change my diet, give up drinking and smoking, or I would be in here again with more stones and more pain. I resolved then and there that I would do something about that. That night I was still groggy from all the medication of the day, but nevertheless played John's show for New Year's Eve. I don't remember how I got through it, but after the performance, John came up to me and smiled and said, "That's one of the best shows you ever played, Gino." New Year's Day we traveled to Pasadena. I loved playing at Maldonado's. It's a quiet restaurant with a 9-foot Steinway in the dining room with small tables all around. It is an intimate little restaurant that seats maybe 40 people, very upscale and elegant. I sat at the piano with a mirror up against my back and John on a stool right next to me. It was a charming engagement, just the two of us, and the audience loved it that we were so close to them. During the day, I talked with Sheila about our songs. I told her I couldn't wait to get together in person. After finishing our engagement in Pasadena, I flew back home to DFW for a few days and then went on to Newark to stay with Sheila at her father's home in Clark, New Jersey. I brought my keyboard/workstation in hopes of writing some songs with Sheila. When I arrived, Sheila picked me up at the airport and drove us to their home in Clark. They had prepared a room for me in their home downstairs where they had a piano. They did not charge anything for staying there while we worked. They even provided me with food. I felt at home, and Sheila's dad, Jack, and I got along famously. He took me to his store in Passaic, a huge auto parts store. He also had another store in Yonkers that his son was managing. Jack said that they were not wealthy, but that they were comfortable. To me, that meant they were wealthy. Jack said his secret was having a rubber band around his wallet so that it would be work to undo. Consequently, one could save money that way. I thought, what a great way to hold on to your money. Maybe that's where the phrase tight came from. During my stay in New Jersey, we went into the city. Sheila took me to Chinatown, where she knew of a Chinese doctor that looked into the palms of your hand and prescribed herbs as medicine. I was skeptical at first, but since Sheila seemed to know about things in advance, I went anyway. The doctor was amazing. He said that I had low adrenal gland function and gave me a concoction of herbs to be made into a tea and consumed once a day, preferably at night. He said it would improve the functioning of my kidneys too, and that I would have more energy. I kept a copy of the list of herbs in case this was going to work. After several weeks of drinking this tea, I began to notice that my energy level was higher and my craving for cigarettes was decreasing. Even though Sheila smoked like a chimney, I was still eager to write more songs. We wrote about a half a dozen songs in the 4 weeks I stayed there. I planned on writing orchestrations for them and going into the studio when I got back to Dallas. I wanted to put together a demo tape for Pete Stocky at Warner Brothers Music. At the end of my stay there, I invited Sheila and her daughter Deborah to come with me to Singapore for the Miss Universe pageant. I told them I would arrange for a room at the hotel for them to share and free admission to the telecast as my guest. Everyone who worked the pageant was entitled to guest passes, and I thought they might enjoy seeing a live telecast, how it was put together. Sheila's daughter, Deborah, was studying acting at Rutgers and was thrilled about going. She already had a stage name chosen, Deborah Zoe. She did not like her mother's married name, Powalko. She wanted one with ease of memorability for her future fans. She was very eager to learn how a live telecast was put together. Because of that trip, her interest in TV and film accelerated. To date, she has been seen on television in the popular series Sex and the City, Monk, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Angel, Spin City, as well as She Spies in Pensacola, Wings of Gold. She also starred in the television movie Skin Complex. Deborah has also been featured in the films A Sight for Sore Eyes, White Rush, Asylum Days, and Road Trip. In her spare time, the actress enjoys reading, rollerblading, and hanging out with her dog. I flew back to Dallas and finished up the orchestrations for the songs we wrote. I met Sheila and her daughter Deborah at LAX a few days later at the end of April, and we flew together to Singapore, where I would have an epiphany to last a lifetime, one of those defining moments in one's life. I did not realize it at the time, but later, about a year after that, the fruits of my revelation would start the road to change. My search for beauty would blossom forth in a revelation so profound it would guide me to my destination with happiness, good fortune, and health, and a sense of belonging. I would start my journey of transformation and be forever changed for the good. If you like this episode, click like and add your comments. Better still, why don't you subscribe if you haven't already so that you may receive email notifications of future episodes. Also, check out our other worlds at Seven World Productions: the world of art, the world of faith, the world of family, the world of food, the world of games, and the world of music. Go and be inspired.